I wanted to start at the start, and just where did the choice to live on the road initially come from?
Yeah, so unusually that's a question I haven't been asked before, not in that exact way. So I think the first sort of movement, as it was to leave home fairly early on. I wasn't happy in the education system, and I think I was 17 when I left home. I kind of ran off to London with my boyfriend, and we'd heard about like squatting, and we got the squatter's handbook, and so we were like, okay, so we'll break ourselves a squat. And so that was the first kind of year or two of me living in London. But what I always found was that it felt too static. It felt too it wasn't dynamic enough for me as a person living in squats and kind of being stuck in London. And then I originally started going to like big dub reggae events and sort of American hardcore bands and that sort of stuff. And then I'd heard about these raves, and I was kind of quite like weirdly scared of the idea of going to a rave at first, even though I was, you know, in the mosh pit at the front of gigs and taking acid and speed with like aged punks and things. But for some reason, like the rave thing, because it was so new, it was like, what is this and what is this drug ecstasy, and it was a bit nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And then I went and obviously loved it, and then that progressed into kind of going to the illegal raves and the illegal warehouse parties. And in the meantime, in the background of all this, I'm still living in squats. I'm working, like I've always worked since I was 17, but I'm like living in squats and really aware of that whole community. And then I kind of become aware of this like wider community, sort of outside of London, you know, the New Age traveller scene, and a lot of the free parties ended up being done alongside sort of more traditional traveller kind of gatherings and festivals. So then I was like aware of these people living in these amazing vehicles and sort of moving around the country. But the clinching moment for me was a combination of the criminal justice bill in 1994 making putting on parties in England very difficult, and the fact that I heard about people out in Europe living on the road. And for me, that was it. I'd had enough of kind of the static sort of life in the squatting scene, and I think I spent about a year saving up and bought myself a really rubbish Ford Transit, stuck a big bed in the back, and that was it. I was on the road.
Wow. It's clearly something you embraced fully. I can see that from your photos, but was it always something that you were sure of, like that was the life for you?
I always like to think about things as, you know, think about my life as possibly anybody's life. So, like, I just think a certain set of circumstances happened that made that life seem very accessible to me and welcoming and, you know, exciting. It wasn't frightening at all. I'm not really someone that has an awful lot of fear in me. You know, we went on extremely adventurous holidays when I was a kid, mainly because you know, my dad would just stick us all in the back of the car, and there were 4 kids and 2 stepkids as well. Not stepkids, sorry, half sister and brother. So sometimes there'd be 6 kids and mum and dad, and we'd all be shoved in some car, and, you know, we would do things like drive to Greece, you know, 5 days camping along the way, and that was like before there were proper motorways, you know, this was like going through like former Yugoslavia. And so I was always up, you know, I was always, you know, kind of used to the adventure and the travelling side of it. But then, and again, I don't like to separate myself from anybody, but at the age of about, I think I was about 22, when I turned around to my dad one day and said, why is it I can't sit still, you know, I can't like all my friends seem to be quite happy in their flats or whatever. Why can't I stay in one place for more than a few months? And he actually then chose that point to tell me that I had Roman blood on his father's side. So in a funny way, that helped me like understand this kind of wanderlust I had. Although I just think I was like that anyway, to be honest.
Yeah. As for the photography side of things, what was sort of the thought process before you would press down the shutter?
Capture it, keep it. So I mean, I've got my first pack of photos that I've got was taken when I was about 7. So my dad was always photographing the family and our kind of escapades, and so I was very aware of cameras. And we had the toilet that we converted into a dark room every now and then when he wanted to print. So I had some experience of kind of being in a dark room, at home. And but actually, I was never that interested in that side of it. For me, it was much more the kind of magic of being able to keep a moment that you'd had. And for someone that enjoyed adventures, obviously that worked very well for me. I was experiencing so many things, going to these raves, going to these illegal raves, then finally living on the road, that it was like the easiest way for me to capture it and keep those memories. So it was all about that, really. And
when did you start thinking of this as a piece of art and not just, documenting moments of your life?
I mean, always and never, really. I mean, the early photos I took were much more, in inverted commas, sort of artistic. They were, I was doing still lives and experimenting with messing around with negatives and chemicals, and then I think because the experiences I were having became so intense, then it became more of this diaristic kind of approach, like diaristic sort of need. But there were always phases of which I went back into doing more experimental kind of imagery. Not that I've really shared a lot of that, to be honest. That's something maybe for the future. But what was I going to say? When do I think of it as art? I suppose the obvious answer to that is after I published the book. So I published No System in 1999, and I was the youngest, and I think the youngest artist to ever publish a book was Steidel, I think, and a woman. Yay. And although I didn't realise what that meant at the time, because I was really detached from any kind of industry or scene, I was obviously aware of the fact that people were looking at my work in a certain way. And that was when the kind of the preciousness of it occurred to me, and the uniqueness of it. So probably 1999, when I was about 24. Yeah.
How important is the physical aspect of your work, like your shows and your books? Even I saw a glimpse of your collection of flyers in Bristol. Everything of yours just feels like quite tactile, which is unusual today.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, for me, there's always a spirit of something, or without wanting to use what in my day was called hippie language, the energy of something, and I do feel that being close to an object or being around a person or whatever is very different from an online version. But at the same time, for me, the internet is a fantastic way of sharing with more people. So mine was always about sharing, really, not intentionally, but it just in my nature. I was like, oh my God, I'm doing these amazing things and having these incredible experiences. Come and have a look. Come and join me. Come and join us. So No System, that first book, I almost saw as a kind of like a brochure for that way of living, you know, not dropping out, but living outside of society or living outside of the constraints of a lot of, you know, the laws and the societal constraints of you know, Britain. And yeah, I mean, I don't really fetishize things particularly. I'm not massively kind of careful with this stuff. It's much more about getting it out there and sharing it. But I think, you know, I often say to young photographers, and photographers especially that are working with film or digital, it's like, just print your stuff. Do packs of 6x4 prints, you know, and even if you don't really like it, just print it. At least do a contact sheet and put it in a box. You know, just put it in a box and keep it. And it, you know, forget objects, you know, well, flat objects, flyers, fair enough, but just a simple way of like archiving these memories, and they get more and more charged as the years go by and more special.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely an energy in physical objects.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I saw a photo on your Instagram of like boxes and boxes of archives, which I thought was quite a mental picture.
Yeah, so I never did contact sheets. I always did prints because it wasn't about. I just never understood why would you want a contact sheet? You can't even see the images. You know, it's almost about like. That was almost about like hiding them away. I wanted, you know, if I could have afforded to do like 10x8 prints of all of them, I'd have done them all. And even the shit ones and the ones with my finger over the lens and the, you know, it was the joy of having that pack of photos in your hand or receiving it from wherever you get them made. You know, often for me it was like boots. You know, it meant that I still to this day do 6x4 prints of everything, packs of them. For as long as I can afford it, I'll keep doing it. You know, for as long as there's a shop that does it. Because then you can go into these boxes and again you can share, or you can just look through, you can edit. It's lovely to edit with images like that, with prints. And also, they mean so many different things to so many different people. Like, to my son, they'll mean one thing. To my mum, they mean another. To a friend that's in them, they mean another thing. And to me, they mean another thing, you know. So when you've got a contact sheet, it's only really, like, you'll only really print your first edit. But surely over those years, your edit would change. It would change probably almost every year that you looked at it. So you might as well get the prints made. That's what I say.
Yeah. What thoughts or emotions do you have looking back on these photos now? Because like you said, I suppose for me, I feel something completely different from you would, in the sense that you were actually there, and this is essentially your photo album that you're displaying.
Yeah, and like I say, you know, even a friend of mine that was there would feel completely different about them than I did. I would generally, as a person, I can stay quite buoyant and positive, but there are definitely, you know, when I put up the Life of Subversive Joy, for example, it's gone up once in the Saatchi Gallery and is currently up at the V&A in Dundee. That's a 23 metre long installation of quite small photos, about maybe just under 800 photos and pieces of ephemera and notes and paintings and all sorts of things I've done. When I put that up the first time, I would say the process of putting it up, I completely was lost in it, in the world. It didn't go on the wall anything like I'd planned, because I was kind of so submerged in the material. And at the end, I was completely exhausted. So the second time I put up at the V&A, I thought, you know, right, okay, I've seen all this. I know what this is going to do. Just put it out, you'll be fine. But again, it's incredibly emotional, and I can't say whether it's good or bad. It's just emotional, you know, and it's full of again, you know, all this residual, like, energy and memories and relationships. Every time I look at a photograph, my relationship with those people may have changed slightly. So, you know, it's very powerful for me.
Yeah.
But weirdly, my greatest fear was that when I put it up, it would seem like it was all about me. And the first few people that walked into the room, I was like, oh my God, what are they going to think? And in fact, it became what I wanted it to become, which was a sort of a mirror to other people's lives. So although it was my life, what it strangely did was reminded them of parts of their lives. That was the strongest reaction I had from everyone.
Yeah, that's interesting. They are quite intimate and diaristic photos. I imagine you felt quite protective of maybe both the photos and the subjects. Was there a hesitancy for you to share these with the public?
I think with the original book there was a huge hesitancy, yes. And in fact I refused. It wasn't supposed to be published. It was supposed to be a set of photos that I wanted to copy 10 times into 10 photo albums, one for each of the sound systems I've been sort of travelling with, I've been friends with for the last 10 years, you know, the 1990s basically. And then I was told that would be incredibly expensive, and my friend at the time, Corinne Day, was having a book of her work published. And she said, oh, you should meet the publisher, or the publishing agent, Michael Mack, who's really lovely. And I was kind of like, no fucking way, you know. I'll get lynched, and you can't do that. And not so much about this idea of people's images of them, but more about the whole scene and the fact it was a free scene, and I didn't want to be seen to be making money out of it. That was my biggest fear. But in the end, I had a few meetings with him, and he said, you know, you could give everyone a copy, and then 100 people would get a family photo album, not just 10. And so I could have the final edit, and I didn't have to put anything I didn't want to, and I could keep it very positive, which was very important to me. And so I made up a mock copy of the book, which is actually in the Martin Parr Foundation now. And I took it back on the road for a year. So that was like me physically going around in my camper van trying to find everyone that was in it to kind of say, what do you think? And because there wasn't the internet at the time, so that was the only way to do it, to find people. And nearly everyone had the same reaction, which was initially like, no, you can't do that, and then, well, if you give me a copy, that's cool. So, you know, and I think I felt by the time I'd done Life of Subversive Joy, those photos had been out there, and anyone that, you know, people knew that I had a lot of photos, and I think the general consensus is that people love to have that book. People that were there loved to have that book. And then when it came to the Life of Subversive Joy, it was much more personal, I think, than that book was. So it kind of was more about, do I want to put this stuff up about myself rather than the other people so much.
Right.
And then that question kind of stopped there, and I didn't ask it anymore, and I just did it. Yeah. But I don't regret it.
No.
If you ask.
That's good. Can you talk a little bit about your future youth project and explain a little bit about what social sculpture is?
Yeah, so to put it in context, I left school with just GCSEs, and by the time I was in my kind of early 30s, I was kind of ready to settle down, and I became pregnant, and that was my kind of cue to move into a house. And then I moved to Ramsgate by the Sea, and I thought, well, I was just having a lot of thoughts and ideas about my work that I couldn't really express. So I decided to go to art college, but I had a 2-year-old kid, so that, as a single mum, that was not an easy thing to do. So I did a 6-year part-time course in fine art. And during that, I came across, obviously I read a lot, probably really for the first time in my life, around art and photography, but mainly art. And I came across the work of Joseph Beuys, as you would. and I found it incredibly powerful. And his blackboards and his writing and his teachings, and then I came across this idea that he coined, which was social sculpture. So loosely, the idea is instead of sculpting an object, you sculpt a situation, or you sculpt a social moment. And suddenly that, to me, was the key, bringing together the kind of the disparate sort of threads in my life. So there was the being on the road, there was the humanitarian convoys that I'd already started at that point. For other people, I joined on the backs of convoys going out to Chernobyl and other places using my truck to transport aid. So that was a thread, and also my art practice. And I realised I could sort of weave them all into to one, which is kind of what you want to do in your life, isn't it? You want your work and you want everything you want to do work-wise and with your heart, and to kind of become one, and Future Youth Project symbolised that. So it was basically the idea. The idea was that I would continue to visit the projects or the places that I had visited before in Ukraine, helping people with disabilities in state-run orphanages over there. But this time I would take a group of people with me and kind of take them on this, long journey, both emotionally and physically. So I bought a bus as part of my final piece, and the idea was this open invitation for people to join me, driving out to Ukraine to one of these orphanages, and about 9 people came with me, including people that hadn't left Britain before, people with disabilities, people with mental health issues, and it was open to all. So that's how it started, and now we've done about 9 journeys.
Wow.
So, to Ukraine and Romania.
It feels very much in the same spirit as a lot of your photography work, sort of travelling and conditioning an alternative way of life to people.
Exactly. It was just, for me, it was the essence of it all.
Yeah.
Because, life on the road, travelling with a sound system and putting on raves, really full on and mostly illegal.
Yeah.
And for me, unsustainable. I didn't have enough energy in the end to keep doing that. But this kind of reciprocal giving it both charged me up, made me feel good about myself, made me feel positive, and also did that for everyone involved. So it was almost like there was no negative outcome. Everyone that went out to Ukraine had an amazing time, and we're grateful to the finally 47 men that we now look after, disabled men, and the 47 men made us feel great, and so everyone was a winner.
I read an interesting quote from you where you said there was a commitment to a set of ethical ideals about how we should and could relate to each other. All of your work feels quite utopic, like what I refer to as hedonistic. It's very testimonial. So what to you would be a utopia or your own Garden of Eden?
I've got to disagree with you, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay.
I'm 48. I think any utopian ideals sort of slipped away when I was about 18. But what I do believe is that one shouldn't live in fear, and that human connection is a huge uplifter. I think we all suffer from our lack of connection. So if it feels like that, it's as an antidote to what I know is reality and what I know is the reality we all face. So it's more of a kind of, one of my alter ego is called Dr. Joy. So, just in the essence, a doctor is someone dealing with a malady. So it's never about reaching a utopian situation. it's more about balancing out the good and the bad in life, and creating joy to kind of balance out the hardships we all face.
Yeah. Interesting. I think I first saw your work in the Tate Modern, but I kept re-encountering it last lockdown. With both your rave stuff and your protest
I'm
stuff.
on your algorithm.
Yeah. But with both the rave photography and the protest photography, did you get a sense of sort of deja vu last summer watching everything unfold?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, I could feel it, boiling under the surface. I'm very lucky in that I have quite a lot of connection with young people and people in their 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And even before they knew it, I felt that this was coming on. The Conservatives being in power always is a kind of perfect storm for repression and depression, I think, in a lot of young people. And people self-medicate. They need release. They need connection. They need to know that they're of more importance than just, their marks, educationally, or the money they make. And I think in some ways our society doesn't always cater for that very well. Basically, nearly all forms of gathering have become increasingly thousands of laws have been passed in the last 200 or 300 years against gathering, against dancing, against carnival, against everything. So, what are we to do?
Do you have hope for the new generation?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the energy is always there in the new generation, physical energy. And if that can be inspired in the right way and harnessed, it's incredibly powerful. Yeah. Yeah, it's all about the new generation. The old generation, the best of us are wise or, at least worldly, but the young have the energy. Just, I would say my in general terms, I would say my choice in parenting was to give him a blank slate and see what kind of journey he took me on, to meet him and see who he was.
Right.
And generally, parenting, never to even mistakenly shame someone out of being creative or moving in an interesting way or speaking in an interesting way. Always, be open to their uniqueness and their oddity.
Finally, I wanted to know, is there a song or a few songs that you think of when you think of this time? Like, or a song, if you heard it, it would send a flood of memories back to you?
Not really. It's a huge mishmash. I mean, people quite often mistake the fact that techno was all that got played at these big parties we did, but it didn't. It got played till about, morning, and often at dawn other music was played for the next 12 hours, reggae music, hip-hop music, disco, punk, so I really do feel like I've been to all the best parties, not that there aren't better parties happening out there, but for me, and listen to so much wonderful music. I could never cite one, although I did have an amazing moment dancing with the father of my child to amazing moments. So dancing to there's a couple of songs by Task Force, one called Cosmic Gypsy, which is brilliant. I'll leave it at that.
Do you still listen to the music you were playing at parties back then? Or what's on your playlist now?
Yeah, I mean, techno is not exactly easy listening, so it has its moments. Usually if I've been out for a run or a walk, I come back and I can have a dance, or if I'm trying to, you know, sort of shake off some stress. But generally it's like I say, you know, a whole mixture of world music, reggae music, you know, and some new stuff too. Archie introduces me to new things, so yeah, always a mishmash.
Yeah, that's the best way. All right, that does it. That's all. That's all the questions I've got.
That's enough for you, isn't it?
Yeah, that's plenty. Okay. Thank you.
Great, and I'm very pleased that you've asked about the Future Youth Project, and it would be nice to have, you know, a little chunk on that, because people often mention it in passing, but it's where a lot of my new work is heading. So.
Yeah, that's why I noticed. I thought that it'd be important to, you know, see what you're doing now, not just what you were doing in the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, when I put up the Life of Subversive Joy, a lot of people ask me, you know, it's, you know, the first little bit is before, you know, and the middle section, about a third, maybe 3/4 of it is, you know, raving and all that. But the good last third to a quarter is all other stuff. And a lot of people ask me about that, interestingly, because, you know, I suppose that's even more unique to me. Anyway.
All right.
Great.
Thank you very much for doing this.
Good
I really
question.
appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
All right. You have a good day.
All right.
Bye.
And you.